Welcome back to Killer Fun, where we explore the intersection of crime and entertainment every other week. I'm Christy.
And I'm Jackie.
And we're so glad that you're back with us today. Today, we are talking about why we are not talking about Dahmer, at least not in our normal way.
That's right.
So, we started watching the show.
Uh-huh.
It's well made.
Yeah.
Maybe even with some good intention.
Mm-hmm.
But it's difficult to watch. And maybe hurtful to the families.
And I think some of the families shared enough that it got to our ears.
Yes.
And certainly made us think.
Yeah. That maybe this is not an appropriate thing to cover.
Yeah.
At least not in our normal way. And so, we want to make some choices about being ethical in our true crime going forward, about being kind in our true crime, make sure that we're not contributing to somebody else's sadness, to their heartache. That's not what we want to do. That's not what this is about. It's never been what it's about. And I feel like for the most part in the past, we've done a pretty good job of trying to be really respectful, but we have some ideas about some ways we can maybe do a little better.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll elicit some feedback from you guys.
A conversation.
Yeah. What if there's things that we're not doing that we ought to do, or ways that we can do it better? That'd be fantastic. So,
yeah. And I think we're going to be a little meta too, because I think we're going to talk about just the whole genre, right, of true crime and what we do. And because our true crime podcast is a little different, right? We hone in on things that have already been produced in entertainment world, right? Now it's true crime, it's crimey. Maybe it's not true crime, maybe it's entertainment crime, and it's a totally fictional story. So we really focus in on something that's like entertainment, which is why this Dahmer thing would have been like typically right up our alley,
Right. But it's a little too close to the truth and yet not true.
And also a little bit not respectful of the way they told other people's stories.
Right.
And I think in the past we've tried really hard to know, how does this affect like any living victims? But most of the stuff we cover, it's like, it's been a minute.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and it's been a minute since all this happened, but it's still really re-victimizing the families over and over.
There was scenes in this one that were reenacted from people who are still alive, who were the ones who...
And they had no idea that it was going to be in the show. And that's, I think, where the real problem lies, right?
Absolutely.
Like that they were not given the opportunity to give or deny permission for the usage of their likeness.
And their actual transcripts.
Right.
Like the actors were reading verbatim. Now I understand that these things are public.
Right.
But the actors were like wearing almost the same outfit. Well, it was a reenactment.
And we've lauded that in the past about how, it's so accurate. It's so good. And it's so,
it is hard because, really, like everything else, it's a kind of a balance, right? But sometimes you can have good intentions and you just have to change course when you realize it's hurting somebody. Whereas maybe another one we've covered where they got it right, the people involved weren't necessarily that concerned about it.
Right.
And so it is kind of a balance. I think not a hard and fast rule that we can say.
Right.
Which is why this has to be a whole discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The first crime about the show is the title. Let's be honest. Dahmer - monster : the Jeffrey Dahmer story. It's too much punctuation and it says Dahmer twice.
Yeah, it's not good.
No.
It's not good.
So let's talk about why maybe that's kind of important. Because the showrunner, Ryan Murphy, claimed that he wanted this show to recenter the story on the victims. And I think that putting the killer's name in the title twice kind of is the first indicator that he wasn't doing a great job at this.
Absolutely fair point. That's so true.
MSNBC had an article about this, and they said Dahmer clearly mastered the art of blending in and using the incompetence of police officers to his benefit. That should terrify us now, just as it terrified the nation more than 30 years ago. And if cultivating and amplifying that terror is the goal of the Netflix series, it has succeeded. However, if the show's goal is to recenter Dahmer's victim, as showrunner Ryan Murphy claims, then it failed miserably. He didn't contact people.
He didn't.
Nobody.
Not at all. Not even a heads up, which I think is the first kind of like discussion point in the whole topic. Is maybe it doesn't require permission when it's a public story and it's a story that, you know, is of national interest, global interest, you know, personal interest for people.
Right.
But there is, I think, a level of ethics that can be taken to at least notify.
Right.
At least.
Especially when it's relatively recent, really well known. I've read some accounts, which I don't have in front of me, from some of the victims' families. And every time that there's a new story, they get bugged.
Yeah.
They get bothered. People are interested. And when it's an unsolved case, you want people interested.
Well, that's true.
But when it's solved and all it does is serve to remind you that your loved one is no longer with you, it's a problem. So I don't know. That's partly an audience problem.
Yeah.
Like, leave these people alone.
Yeah. I mean, it's the creating a hassle for them once again.
Right.
Is the problem.
Well, and it's not just a hassle. It's a hassle that reminds them of the worst thing that ever happened to them in their life.
Yeah. And that's hard. I mean, because some people want to tell their story. They want to be a part of things.
Well, and they should.
And some people don't.
Right.
So we do have to kind of, for instance, the docuseries.
Sure.
At the same time that Dahmer, this and punctuation title came out, there was a docuseries that comes out, and that documentarian actually did contact everyone. Right. Everyone had a heads up. Nobody gave like a hard, like, no, we don't want you to do this. And it was focused on what it said it was going to be focused on, which was actually the police story.
Right.
Like, it was from the police perspective and the lawyer's perspective about it. And they were a part of it.
Right.
So I think that's ethics well done.
Right.
Not in a perfect world. The victims' families weren't involved. But I think ethically everything was handled really well.
Yes. Well, they knew it was coming, for one thing. And it came basically at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the confession tapes, right?
The confession tapes.
So I understand why Netflix did that, to hit on the, once you finish Dahmer, if you were interested in it, maybe you want to go and listen to the confession tapes and hear a more accurate retelling or the police side of the retelling. It kind of hits it all at once. So there's a lot of interest already drummed up for it.
True.
Okay. So I see why they did that.
The documentary began filming before Dahmer.
Okay. Right. Yes. So, and that they hit at the same time maybe provides one instance of hassle towards these families rather than two. So I can respect that, but I cannot respect the idea that we've got this really huge, Netflix's biggest show ever.
Yeah.
That's traumatizing to victims.
I know. And it's so hard because, you know, we love this stuff.
I mean,
we were excited.
Okay. Normally I do. And let me tell you, I watched the first episode and a half and I couldn't watch anymore.
Oh, man.
And that's saying something because I am pretty okay and not okay. I'm pretty all right watching this stuff, divorcing myself from the traumatizing aspects of it and just understanding that this is a story that happened and, you know, this one was hard. Mm-hmm. So
something about it.
Yeah. Well, and it was just so callous and cruel. He was a callous and cruel man.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we've covered others. Mm-hmm. Right? But if I compare those to this, okay, so, all right, so Dahmer, awful. Right. BTK, also very awful. But we covered the book that his daughter wrote.
Right. Which was giving her a voice to talk about what it was like to be kind of a victim.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, I would say, Yeah, full on.
Yeah.
Full on a victim.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it was different.
It was different.
And yet I will watch stuff on, like documentary stuff on BTK.
Yeah.
And I will watch crimey TV shows that may have like Criminal Minds that might have a fictionalized story that is enough different that it's not, using the same outfit as one of the victims or the transcripts that they said in court.
Right.
Enough different that like you can tell the story without being,
right.
I don't know. It's almost like plagiarism, but I know it's not.
Yeah. But it kind of feels that way, especially when you didn't have buy-in from the victims. So almost rather they'd have done a fictionalized version of his stories where they used different names and different...
Yep.
Because they did fictionalize this. We'll get to that.
Oh, yeah.
We'll get to that.
Good.
But, and I mean, you have to kind of look at what are some of the good things that true crime's done. What's the biggest true crime podcast like ever? Serial. Adnan Syed is free because of that particular podcast, because it happened. Now I have a lot of empathy for the victim's family because now they feel like their daughter's killer is free when really their daughter's killer was never brought to justice. And that can be difficult. And I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for that.
It's hard. It's about whose story is it? That's where it gets complex. Whose story is it? Which story are you telling? And what are your permissions within that story? That's kind of my guidance because there's no, like I said, there's no hard and fast rule I think you can make about it. But I think for me, it's if I'm going to be kind, then I'm going to say, whose story is it? Can I tell their story? And then what are the permissions and the parameters around that story? That's what I'm thinking.
Right.
I don't know, but I'm open. So hit me with some comments because I'm open to learning what other people think about this.
Me too. I mean, you're listening to the show because you like true crime. Because you like crime entertainment.
Yep.
In whatever forms that comes in. So, how do you want to see us cover that in ways that are also not harming?
Yeah, that's the question. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
We don't have all the answers yet, but we've maybe got a few things that we're going to talk about. So you mentioned the person who was basically had their words and likeness used without any permission. So BuzzFeed News has an article about this, and it was Rita Isbell and her brother Errol was murdered by Dahmer, and there's how similar these two images are of her testifying, and how seeing that without any kind of heads up was so utterly traumatizing. Isbell herself told Insider that she was never a part of production or contacted by the creators of the show, and that the family hasn't made any money from it either. Isbell added that watching the exactness of the series recreation has felt like reliving it all over again. If the show benefited them in some way, it wouldn't have felt so harsh, she told Insider. According to the victim's family, it's sad that they're making money off of this tragedy. It's just greed. And I think that's it. This is where we come to it. Greed is crime. And can we stop it with the Evan Peters as Dahmer is hot? We went through this with Bundy.
Yes, we did. It is so hard. And you had some really good research about that then. And I think it's really weird. What do you do when somebody who was absolutely awful and evil, but if they were good, would be considered a catch?
Yeah.
Right? And that's really hard because
Dahmer wasn't a catch, though.
I mean, if he was a catch, we would consider him to be a good-looking guy.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like,
I didn't find him attractive at all.
Divorced from all of his
even
stuff.
Divorced from, I mean, maybe, I don't know. He traveled in different romantic circles than I do, so maybe they would have thought of him as attractive.
I think so.
Not me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we need to stop it.
But, yeah, we've got to upgrade our method of attraction. But for some people, that's what makes them attractive.
Right.
And that's like just toxic.
And yeah, that's
like
wrong.
toxic. That's not a bad boy image. Y'all, this is much worse. This is not just your typical, bad boy. And
well, when you think of a bad boy, you think of somebody your parents don't approve of, or somebody who's maybe not following the law in ways that maybe the law shouldn't be followed.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes like
edgy.
Yeah. You know, or the law is unjust in some way. The law dictates that you have to dress a certain way or, you know, whatever, act a certain way when that doesn't affect anybody but yourself. So maybe those laws don't necessarily need to be followed. But I think we as a society agree that murder is objectively wrong because you're harming somebody else without their permission.
Yeah. No, rebel within reason.
Right. Right.
That's kind of what we're saying.
Right.
But it is weird because like then when they do these things, they do make them hot because they're on screen.
Right.
And so they want him to have a charismatic and a presence, a charismatic presence is what I'm trying to say, that sort of draws you in and makes you want to watch him, when the original character probably had like more of the personality of paper, you know? And so, and with that makes the character look hot. No, it's the actor. The actor is hot.
Yes.
Go follow him on Instagram.
That's right.
Because he's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's this actor who's performing in a way that maybe makes you empathize with them.
That's true too.
I can understand trying to humanize Dahmer because he was an abused person. He was an abused child. Does not make what he did okay.
No.
It is not an excuse. We need to stop looking at these causations or contributing factors as things that excuse the behavior. They just do not excuse the behavior.
Right. What they do is they help us to understand it so we might be able to prevent it, but we don't even know that we could. That's the thing. We don't even know. What we want to do is just do our best. And it's okay to hold empathy and even compassion and still hold responsible and seek justice.
There we go.
Every time. She's got something.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what my next point was.
We're kind of sticking with our normal format, but not. So, you know, if you're newer to the show, you probably have caught on to this format. We describe it that, you know, she comes up with all of the super sleuth stuff, you know, about the thing. And then usually it's like a matter of, did I expect it? Did I think that was true? Did I, you know, what did I think about it? Am I surprised or whatever? And so you still have like all of that, but we're also in the midst of this big like
existential crisis with our show. Yeah.
So, it's a little weird. Bear with us.
Okay. So true crime fascinations have a really like long history.
Oh, yes.
They've always also kind of been lauded or interesting to people in some ways, but not to the extent now that we have this really wide platform with which to talk about it. I think it tends to have a little more glorification than it has in the past. So true crime as a genre dates back as far as the 16th century, by the way, in the Ming Dynasty, when stories about criminal cases of fraud were collected. This is according to MovieWeb. And that, you know, evil is interesting.
It is.
It's fascinating. And we kind of get a catharsis by watching it. On one hand, we're glad that we're not the victims. We're glad that we're not deranged or deluded or evil in the same way as the perpetrators. Mm-hmm. And when we watch people get caught, it makes us feel safer.
We feel good about that.
We do.
Yeah.
And that's why the victims in the Adnan Syed case felt good. They felt like they had gotten some sort of, they felt a little safer because their daughter's killer had been caught. And so then they, you know.
So I get that. That's hard. And yet the justice was still what we were seeking.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting. I mean, true crime. I mean, crime is one of those things. I mean, we have to sort of define it, right? It's things that go against our society.
Right.
And so if you date back, I mean, there's things that were crimes that are not crimes now.
Right.
Thank goodness. You go back. But then there's like those things that are not legal crimes, but like a personal crime. When somebody offends you or does something harmful to you, it may not be illegal, but it's like a personal crime.
Like putting too much punctuation in the name of a show.
Exactly. A crime against titling.
That's right.
Okay. And I mean, we can take that back all the way. And I feel like it's true crime has always been a genre. It was called gossip.
Or news.
I mean, like, we've always been covered.
Didn't you want to know if there's somebody going around your town doing improper stuff?
Yeah.
You want to know that so that you can defend yourself against it. So you can make sure that you lock your door or put your goats away or whatever, I mean, it goes back a long time.
It really does. It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, we want to know about it.
The weird kid next door maybe did something inappropriate. Maybe you want to make sure that you have less of a opportunity to give them the chance to do something inappropriate with you. Now, some of that stuff may not have been true.
Some of it, gossip.
Right.
That's the thing.
That's the gossip. And we run into that. People think that everything they see on the news is true, and it's just not.
It's just not. So, and everything you read on the internet is not true. Some of it is, some of it's not.
I mean, you have to look at sources. This is an important thing that you have to like.
I think, it's bigger and it's more oppressive and in our faces all the time. But the truth is we've always had to kind of discern what we're being told. I mean, hello, it comes up to your phrase that you say every time when we're listening to the narrator tell us a story, and it is,
who is this bastard and why is he lying to me?
Every time.
Every time.
Yep. We have to think about that,
Right.
And it's okay to kind of go through that process in your mind.
Yeah.
When you're hearing something. Yeah.
And even to put it more mildly so that you can apply it more often, rather than who is this bastard and why is he lying to me? Why is this person telling me this story, and are they reliable? Is it accurate?
Yes, that is important in everyday life. It affects people's, reputation very, very easily
right now. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's super important.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about this is we have to be discerning. I think that's what hit us about the Dahmer thing is something hit a little weird, and it was, what is this storyteller telling me?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take a real quick break. We're going to come back with kind of an abridged version of our normal course of things, which is it true, psychology break, and real life after this.
So here's how it works. Christy wrecks her search history. Hey, an essay. We promise it's nothing more nefarious than a podcast. To find out what's true, some of the psychological motivations behind the characters' actions, and real-life applications that relate to our topic. I have no idea what Christy decided to look up. Could be the same thing that captured my curiosity or something I never thought of.
Is it true? So, Ann Schwartz was the crime reporter who broke the case of Jeffrey Dahmer back in 1990. So she shared what the show got wrong, at least as far as we can verify.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So there's a lot of things that we can't verify because we don't know exactly. We have some ideas because of photographs that Dahmer took as souvenirs while he was murdering people.
And we have his confession.
Which
gives us a decent amount of detail.
Gives us a decent amount of detail. But again, how much do we believe what he tells us? Whereas it can be corroborated with pictures, we can understand, but we don't really know what these people's last moments were like. But as far as what can be corroborated.
All right, hit me.
She says that they took a lot of artistic license and that to her understanding, it did not bear a great deal of resemblance to the facts of the case. That is one of my biggest problems with this.
Yeah.
Is that they're purporting to tell it from the perspective of victims, but they're being inaccurate in ways to make the story more interesting or to make it flow better, to fit within their narrative, whatever it is. But you can't do that with a real story unless you go ahead and fictionalize it.
You have to say it.
Which they did, but they didn't so much say it. It feels like a recreation when you're, especially the first episode or two, it feels like a recreation of his crimes, which is ethically a gray area to begin with, but not to, I don't know.
I mean, we've covered fictionalized versions before, but they all have like very well-written disclaimers. He probably could have just gotten one off the internet and used it. Something, events inspired by the events of yada, yada, yada. Right. And then fictionalize it.
Well, or say the victims have been fictionalized for this account.
Right.
Just fictionalize it.
Events have been edited to clarify and make concise, right? Like these things to help. Okay, so the viewer, right? We're hearing this story, and sometimes getting all the details of a case like that may not actually make it clear to us, right? Because it's after the fact. It's kind of so somebody kind of fills in the gaps and does some things so that we come away with a better general understanding of what happened. But when a filmmaker does that, they typically use these disclaimers. They typically sort of fictionalize enough that it's clear that somebody's giving you the cliff notes.
And often those things happen even on many things that we've talked about in the show. They happen at the end of the episode, and I really wish they'd happen at the beginning of the episode always.
Yeah, that's very true. I wish so.
So when Ann Schwartz arrived, she actually arrived at the scene. She heard about it on a police scanner, went there. It was not teeming with police officers as it is depicted in the first episode. There were only just a few there. She stuck her head in. Like she was just able to do that. It was like the early 90s.
Yeah. Well, she had a relationship with these officers.
Right, exactly.
She's been around.
And she said, I guess the thing that was strange was that it didn't look strange. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. She said she'd been a crime reporter for a while, and it didn't smell like a decomposing body in there. So they depict it as like that you walk in and that there's a strong odor of decay. And she said it was more of a chemical smell.
Well,
yeah,
there's reasons for that.
Well, exactly. But again, they didn't portray that. They tried to make it more sensational. Oh, the neighbor can smell dead bodies. And that wasn't the case. Like,
no, they actually are interviewed in the other one.
Right. Okay.
And so we get their account.
Right.
And we kind of get like the neighbor, we get another reporter who was kind of, fast on the scene after her.
Right.
And more towards more of the cops showing up, more when it became chaos and things like that. And so you have sort of different perspectives. Like her vast history of crime made it look more normal in there. Another reporter felt like it was like, who could live here? Right. But I mean, that doesn't necessarily denote crime. Right. So it's interesting to hear those two perspectives. Could just be
the hoarders situation.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting to hear both of those things. But yeah, the chemical smell, like that's the neighbor smelled.
Right. That's what she, and she didn't live in the same building. What she's depicted as living right next door.
Oh my God, no!
That's what I took from it watching the first episode.
Oh my gosh,
was that she was lived
and that's
like
ridiculous.
Right next door, and she lived in a different building.
Yeah. No, they're combining two characters, her and his neighbor.
Oh, okay.
His neighbor who lived kind of like just down the hall, and was the like knock on his door, like we know you kind of neighbor.
See, and that wasn't clear.
See, and I mean, it's fine. I get that you have to make some choices in order to tell the story in a short block with constraints. It makes sense, but I don't know why he chose to not adhere to some of the basic protocols that were already in place. Not like what we're saying is groundbreaking in some ways. I mean, people have understood this for a while, so why not just, that's what I would ask him. Like, what were you trying to achieve? By doing it this way? What wall were you trying to break down? Or were you just being greedy? I don't know. Like,
I don't know that they went into it with an intent for greed, but that's kind of how it turned out.
I know. I feel bad. I feel bad for everybody involved.
Yep.
Ugh.
She also said that she went on to work with the Milwaukee Police Department and the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And in the show, the police are depicted as racist and homophobic. She said in her experience, that wasn't actually the case. That a lot of the people who were gay and victims of crime didn't report it to the police because they were worried about the police officers being racist and homophobic. She said she didn't find that to be the case typically, but it was also because they didn't want to be outed in conservative Milwaukee. And because that would mean their families would find out, they would lose their jobs. I mean, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that the police weren't going to believe them. It's a possibility, but that wasn't her experience with it, that there were larger societal factors at work that contributed to that. And actually, she wrote a book called The Man Who Could Not Kill Enough, Ann Schwartz did.
Ooh.
And she got a phone call from Dahmer from prison because the psychiatrist who had interviewed Dahmer suggested that it was this mistreatment by his parents that was a large contributing factor to his behavior. Okay, so right or wrong, that's what they said. That's what she put in her book. He was very angry about that.
Oh.
This is so interesting. He hated that. For someone who didn't show any emotion or seem to care about anything, he was very protective about his parents. He had no inflection in his voice. He was so vanilla. He was so flat. There was nothing. He said, there was no one responsible for what I did except for me. Which...
Oh, this is why I, by the way, enjoyed the confession tapes, because listening to him talk about this is so like... For me, being in my background with psychology and things like that, I'm like, I could just dive into this forever and listen to this because it's so weird. Like, you've just got to go watch it because it's the lawyer who actually got the tapes, who interviewed him. And she's talking about her relationship with Dahmer. And it's like, it is so interesting how he can be, I'm gonna use positive words here, which feels very weird. I'm not saying he's hot. Okay. All right. He had a weird amount of integrity about his responsibility for his crimes.
A certain self-awareness that's unusual.
We just covered a show called The Patient.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Did you watch the finale?
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Okay. Whew. If you haven't done it yet...
Oh my gosh.
Now's the chance. Go do it because we're going to spoil it later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the whole premise of that being the killer who realizes he's a killer and doesn't want to kill. Did it hit with Dahmer? Oh. Which makes you just scream because he had... And he didn't have anybody to help him, but he had enacted self-control. There was years between the first kill and like the second, and then the third, and then it started to ratchet up. And it was because he didn't want to kill, but he wanted to kill. Right. And it's interesting to listen to him, and I'm sure that I can imagine, like if I'm connecting the dots, the story I'm hearing is that he's been dealing with this and it's his. And so, of course, he would say it's my responsibility. He's been dealing with that alone. He never even gave himself the empathy that maybe he had some environmental factors he needed to heal from.
Oh, but if you can't recognize those things, you can't heal from them.
Yeah. It's weird. It's weird. I mean, like I said, we don't know if we could have ever actually stopped him. Right. Really. But... except for being behind bars, but it's weird. Oh, yeah. Wow. It's all in the thinks. I'd say in the feels, it's a little, but really it's all in the thinks. Like it really makes you think.
So let's talk about how Netflix screwed up the marketing for the show.
I love how like annoyed you are about this.
Well, because when they first released it, they tagged it LGBT.
No, I did not know this. I didn't know that.
This is not a story about gay crime. And I think maybe that's part of it, is that I have this affinity for that particular group. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about him being gay. It was about him being heinous. And they tagged it LGBT.
Because he was gay.
Because his victims were gay, because he was gay. They screwed it up. They quickly removed it. Oh, LGBTQ. I'm sorry. They did include the Q. Oh. So they did include that. Is wrong. Is bad. Made me mad. Made me angry. Made me not want to watch the show.
Yeah, that's not how that's used.
Because no.
That's not how that...
I see why they did. But this is a true crime show. This is a crime show. This is crime entertainment. This is crime. It's not really got anything to do with being gay.
It doesn't. In this story, it's a very secondary factor.
I mean,
because had he been straight, it would have simply been women. Mm-hmm. And so,
which is the normal sort of course of things.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, what?
He wasn't targeting gays.
He just happened to be gay and it was targeting people
he liked.
That he liked or that he liked and that made him feel poorly about himself. It would be no different if he were straight and killing prostitutes because he slept with prostitutes and that made him feel bad.
Yeah.
And it's really no different.
And in his confession tapes, he talks about how, it would be somebody he'd be so overwhelmingly attracted to them that he just had to take them. It's almost like instead of learning to flirt and then have a relationship, it was so overwhelming that it had to be them and they had to be his. And so, that's a secondary thing. It's not really the point of the story. I guess I can see why.
It was a big mistake.
That's a big mistake.
A really big one.
Okay, question out of my ignorant mind. Do they, because I don't really pay attention to the hashtags. I gotta be honest. I really don't pay attention to these things. Do they tag the city?
No.
What were all the tags?
Okay. The original tags, according to this movie poster type thing, were ominous, psychological, horror, LGBTQ, 1970s, TV.
See, they're just banking on some algorithms working in their favor. But that's not... Mm-mm. Oh.
No.
Well, because, for the same logic, it wasn't about the 1970s either.
Right.
So what did that do for them? I don't understand hashtags. I don't understand it. But either way, it's really dumb. I don't like it.
Wrong.
I feel like that was...
It's supposed to be ways to promote your show based on the important aspects of the content that's covered. That wasn't really the important content of no more than the 1970s were.
Yeah, so that's what I wonder. What would that have done? I guess this is the problem with algorithms now because they're putting the hashtags out there, but they know that somehow it's going to inform some algorithm that's going to hit a viewer.
Right. It was, I don't know, all kinds of icky.
You
gotta understand how how the algorithms work to pull this stuff, but also how those come across to the viewer.
Yeah. Maybe not. That's so rough.
All right. So psychology break.
Yeah, please, because wow.
Yeah. So we're not going to talk really about Dahmer. Because his psyche is all kinds of messed up in ways that aren't really relatable.
Yeah, that's fair.
So let's just be there with that. So let's talk about us in true crime.
Okay, that sounds great.
So consuming true crime can be really detrimental to some people. It can outsize. This is a story from Wired.
Okay.
It can outsize your sense of the possibility of becoming a victim because the kinds of stories that we're typically talking about on this show or any true crime are rare, really. You're unlikely to be a murder victim. for the most part. And that's primarily what we're talking about here. And if you've been somebody who's a survivor of violence, it can be a lot to take in. It can it can amplify those feelings. When you have citizen sleuths, people who are armchair detectives, let's say, they can waste police time. So particularly when they're looking, if it's a show or a podcast that's looking at an unsolved case, that's, that it's something you have to be aware of when you think you have good information. You want to share it judiciously.
It's hard. Like the show Only Murders in the Building, which is like, oh my gosh, that is so funny. But that's what I kind of think about with that. But that would be going well with the police.
Right.
But also, I don't know how far along you are, but there's also another season where we find out it did not go as well with the police.
Right.
And so I could see how that would be a problem. And like there's other podcasts like Reveal where you've got these journalists who are amazing and they go back and deal with cold cases that really, frankly, the police don't have time to continue. That's why they've been put in a cold case file. And so they're able to maybe bring out more information because they can do it. So I can see how that might be helpful. But yeah, I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people, I think a lot here because I have nothing to back this up. This is me just thinking. I feel like there's probably a lot of the podcast shows out there that, or other armchair detectives in whatever format they're using, who are wasting police time because they're really interested in the conspiracy.
Okay.
Not in actually solving crime.
Fair. Super fair.
That would be my thought.
Yeah. So Dawn Cecil is a criminology professor at the University of South Florida, and she wants to warn us that when you go into true crime forums, you have to be wary of them being echo chambers because they really can, and consuming true crime really can skew your perception of crime, and it really reinforces stereotypes at times. So you have to be really careful about that to make sure that you're not contributing to that.
That's true. That makes sense.
And then for the Cleveland Clinic, psychologist Shiavana Childs, a doctor, said that our interest in true crime is really normal. We're curious. So that's great, but you have to be wary of your true crime consumption because it can have an impact on your mental health, and it disproportionately appeals to women.
That's true.
So women are already typically victims, as are with Dahmer, people in minority groups. Many of his victims were not only gay, but they were minorities. They were Hispanic or Black. She says you really need to be vigilant and aware of your own reactions to true crime, that you want to make sure that you're not becoming overly reactive to the point where you can't function.
That makes sense. I mean, it's so true. Women particularly, because, we are disproportionately victims. We are so interested because it's like we're looking for ways to learn how to avoid it.
Right.
As well as looking for justice in it.
Right.
And then I don't know why we have such morbid senses of humor, but I can see how, okay, all right. If you listen to some podcasts or radio shows or even just reading certain online blogs or online media format. They give you that sense of like a horror, like the soundtrack pushes you towards this sense of dread. It leaves you hanging. Like it's an experience. It feels more like watching a horror flick.
Right.
Except it's true crime.
Right.
And so, and then there's us, where we don't do that.
Right.
And I feel good about that.
Yeah,
I'm going to toot our own horn. I'm going to say we're awesome with that.
Yeah, there we go.
Because I don't mean to, I don't mean to start a war with other podcasts over this. Maybe the ethics, but I digress. But I do want to say that, format aside, you might really enjoy the horror, but watch or listen like it's a horror movie.
Right.
Not like it's a news story or a fun get together while you have some morbid curiosity and dark humor.
Right.
Right. And that's what we do well is just some dark humor.
Right. So things to watch out for. Mm-hmm. If you're scared all the time, if you feel unsafe at your home unduly, you're wary of others to the point of paranoia, or you just have anxiety all the time over this potential of being a victim.
Right.
Some of us have anxiety all the time over a lot of different things. My particular brand of anxiety doesn't make me feel like a victim all the time. So if you feel like your victimhood anxiety is amped up, if you're feeling unsafe unreasonably, maybe it's time to work in a comedy.
Yeah, I like it. I like
it's
it.
It's time to take a step back from the true crime and watch something else.
Yes, I like it.
That's right.
That's smart.
All right, so real life.
Real life.
Dahmer didn't talk to the families. And unfortunately, another show that we have talked about, albeit not the particular episode that we've talked about, talked to the families but didn't abide their wishes.
Ooh, which one? Which
one? A lady named Mindy Pendleton had her stepson's murder covered on Netflix's I Am a Killer.
Oh.
And they pleaded, the family, the stepmother, the father, and other family members on that side pleaded with Netflix not to do this story.
And that, like you said, this isn't the episode we covered.
No,
it's not that story.
No,
but it's
covered,
the show, because it's like an anthology. So each episode is a different story.
Right. We actually covered way back in 2018, Killer in the Eyes of the Law, which convicted Kenneth Foster Jr. of a murder, and Nico LaHood, who is a prominent figure, and the LaHood family is prominent in San Antonio.
Yeah, that was a big deal here.
And they were both a part of it, so we kind of felt okay about covering it, and it was close to home for us. So we were kind of okay with that, but all of these people pleaded with Netflix not to do it. They received a number of letters from this young man. He was in his early 20s when he was murdered. I'm not even going to say his name because they didn't really want it covered. And the executive producer, Ned Parker, emailed the stepmother and said he'd never encountered such a moral dilemma in his career. Without having testimonies of the closest loved ones, Parker acknowledged it would be difficult to present a fully rounded portrayal. But this young man's biological mother, who'd had shared custody of him as a child, but no contact since he turned 18, agreed and talked with them. And so they went ahead and did it. So I feel like this is where we come into this ethical gray area. I understand that they'd already invested resources in it, but abandon it.
Why did
You have family members, 7 family members and friends who'd written letters to plead with Netflix not to cover this case. Ooh. And they did it anyway.
Yikes.
And that feels like greed.
I feel like they all felt like they had a loophole with the biological mother.
Well, I'm sure they did. And if there is no legal obligation to get families' permission or cooperation with these types of stories.
But they got like a moral loophole by having the biological mother say yes. Right. It kind of justified what they wanted to do. Why do they have so many resources invested? Because they don't need to talk to the families.
Right.
But they wanted to.
They wanted their buy-in, but they
had already poured in resources by the time they actually got to that step.
I'm sure.
Oh, well, that's easy. Flip the steps.
Yeah.
Don't go through all of that until you know whether you got the buy-in or not.
Right.
That's not so many resources, right?
Right.
Create a good presentation. I don't know. I mean, I know that's not my job. I'm so there's tons of things I don't know about what goes into that.
I mean, it's one thing. They had to go through some steps to find the story.
Yeah.
And I understand you spent a day or two researching information about this.
I feel like,
that's when you send the email.
That's when you ask for a meeting.
So you've wasted a day or two, which in the grand scheme of things is not that big of a deal.
And by the way, had they gone straight to the families early, right? With the right kind of pitch.
Right.
They might have actually found a negotiated way to break ground on the story while also protecting.
Well, and this family felt like the portrayal of the killer was really soft, that they were too sympathetic to the portrayal of this killer.
Okay, and that brings up my next question, though, about that. It's the killer's story.
Well, it is. It's the killer's story, but you don't have a killer story without a victim.
You don't, but the killer still has a story. Let me play the defense lawyer.
Okay.
Real quick. Like I said, kind of, if it's his story, it was a him.
It was a her,
It was a her in this case. Okay, so it was her story, and she wanted to tell her story. Then the question is, what are the ethical parameters for her to tell the story without telling somebody else's story? And so in that case, that's where I think if they had flipped it and talked to the victims first, they might have found the way that the victims' families could have negotiated to say, okay,
don't use his name.
yeah, like certain things that we can do to let the killer tell her story for whatever good it might do without it being re-traumatizing, or actually giving a statement. Maybe had they been involved earlier, they would have been able to have time to work with somebody to create a statement that might be included so that there's a balanced rebuttal to the killer's story, since it involves somebody else.
Right.
You know, because I mean, I guess I have to say I am interested. I mean, I always want to know, is there a way we can stop killers?
Right.
Is there a way we can stop it early? But in order to do that, we have to hear their stories.
But how do we do that without victimizing their victims' families who remain alive?
Yeah.
That's the question. All right. Well, we're going to take another real brief break, and we're going to come back to talk about what's next for our show. We have some thoughts, and we want to share this with you. All of the sources that we use to inform our discussion here on Killer Fun Podcast can be found on our social media. Join us on Facebook at Killer Fun Podcast, exploring the intersection of crime and entertainment. You can find us on Twitter at Killer Fun Pod, or you can send us an email at killerfunpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to share a link to whatever information you're looking for. We love to hear from you. You might learn a little something too. So lest you be concerned, we're still going to make this show.
Yes.
We're still going to do it going forward, but we're going to make the effort to understand if the families of murdered victims in particular have participated in the project, if it's a true story.
And at least if they're not participating, what was that process like? Do we know that they were given a heads up and we feel like there was an ethical, responsible attempt?
And by participating, maybe it just means they had a say.
Yeah.
Some sort of say in what is happening.
The opportunity to say no.
Right. So should we have other guidelines? We'd love to hear from you.
Should we?
We'd love to know if there are other rules you think that we should have about making ethical true crime.
Yeah.
Be kind, true crime.
Be kind, true crime.
That's right.
That's right.
And finally, something that we're definitely going to do is we're going to add information about resources for victims of the kind of crime that we're talking about.
Right.
So no matter what that is, we're going to promote some sort of organization. It may be national, it may be global, it may be local. So for example, Dahmer's victims were gay in Milwaukee. If you or someone you love is LGBTQ plus in Milwaukee, you might consider MKE LGBT Community Center. So this is a assistance organization that provides support to members of that community. They provide things like counseling, a clothing closet, a food bank, recovery programs, youth programs, disability and aging programs. All of these things where people in this group might be marginalized and not be able to receive that kind of assistance, particularly in somewhere conservative like Milwaukee. They are providing it. So you can visit them at 315 West Court Street in Milwaukee or on the internet at mkelgbt.org.
Awesome.
So we're always going to try and provide some type of resource like that.
Yeah.
That would assist the victims of whatever kind of crime we're talking about, whether it's fictional or real. If you find yourself or you know somebody who is a minority in some way, or a woman or a child or an abusive situation, we're going to try and help you find resources for that. And always you can, if you need resources for a particular thing, send us an email, killerfunpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll do my best to try and help you find resources in your area.
She's good at that.
I am.
She is. And that's great. I think, and we're going to do that live. We're going to say it on the podcast. Not just, I mean, I think show notes are great and our comments are great, but to say it, to, make sure we do that every time to put our awareness on it.
That's right.
And we cover a lot of fictional crime.
Yes,
plenty. I mean, I almost wonder if it's more than the true crime, but even still, it brings up a topic. That's why fiction stories exist. So we're going to do that. That's great. Right. And I love that. And I hope you're happy about that. But don't forget to give us your comments and your suggestions.
Absolutely.
These are our commitments. What are we missing?
Yeah. And if you live in a particular area and you would like to share what is a good resource in your area, we'd love to have that information as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next time, we toyed with the idea of talking about Dahmer's own words in the confession tapes.
Yeah.
The victims' families in that case were all notified and given the opportunity to participate. Now, most declined, but Dahmer's a big bummer.
It is not fun.
No, I mean, it's seriously a big bummer.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a walk on the spooky side a little bit.
I like it.
Dramatized side of true crime with The Watcher, also on Netflix.
Super cool.
But this one is, I almost don't want to say, a terrorized family. In a home, and they did sell their rights to Netflix.
Yes,
so
they are a part of it.
They had some say about how the story was covered. It is largely fictionalized.
Yeah, it's very fictionalized, but I mean the people are happy with the way that the story was told.
Yes, they're not going to watch it, but they're okay that their premise is being used. They have received a little bit of compensation for it. So
which is good. They deserve it. Go watch it.
That's right. So we're going to try and do ethical coverage on an ethically produced show.
Yes.
The Watcher.
Next time.
And until then, be safe, be kind, and wash your hands.
Bum, bum, bum. Da, 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 da.